Michael Schulman, welcome to CNN News 18.
Thanks for having me.
Michael, you're a staff writer at the New Yorker, and you're out with a new book that's titled Oscar Wars: A History of Hollywood in Gold, Sweat, and Tears. It's that very well-researched piece of work for anyone who loves movies, Hollywood, and Oscar. The book is, of course, is an eye-opener. It puts lights on misogyny, money, and prejudice that shaped Hollywood celebration. It also makes you relook at your favorite filmmakers and actors. So, what inspired you to write this book, or was there an incident that triggered this idea?
Yeah, actually, in 2017, I did a story for the New Yorker about the Academy during the year after the Oscars So White controversy. And I went out to Hollywood and I interviewed the president of the Academy at the time, Cheryl Boone Isaacs, and talked to Academy members about how they felt about what the Academy was doing to diversify the membership. And I learned quite a lot about what the Academy does and its history. And then I went to the awards for the first time in person to cover them for the New Yorker. And that was the year of the envelope mix-up between Moonlight and La La Land. And so I just felt like it was like this Hollywood twist ending on a very contentious year in Hollywood that brought out all sorts of issues around racial representation. And so that's where the idea for the book came, was to sort of not talk about every single Oscar year, but just choose about a dozen stories to tell about pivotal years from the last 9.5 decades.
You of course have called the book as Oscar Wars. What was the reason behind calling it that?
Oscar Wars, I don't know. It was just the title that came to me from the start. It sort of sounds like Star Wars. But I knew from the start that what I wanted the book to be about was cultural conflict. And, every year we see this race between different movies to try to win, or different actors or directors. And on one level, the Oscars are a contest between filmmakers. But what I meant by Oscar Wars was to get at something a little deeper, which was, what are the issues that are changing show business and the sort of larger conflicts in American culture or world culture that are simmering underneath the Oscar race every year.
There's a lot of talk going on right now about this year's Oscar. Some are saying this year's Oscars were less on star power. Do you think Academy now needs to relook at this area and include actors who delivered some of the biggest hits that year, say like Tom Cruise and James Cameron and the team of Avatar?
Yeah, this was a really interesting Oscar year because on the one hand, you had a bunch of movies that were nominated, like Avatar: The Way of Water and Top Gun: Maverick, that were huge blockbuster hits. And then on the other side, you had little movies that not a lot of people saw, like Women Talking and Triangle of Sadness and Tar, which, by the way, were some of my favorite movies this year. And I think the Academy has really struggled over the past decade or two with how to incorporate big mega hits in a way that doesn't seem like it's pandering or trying to, set aside questions of actual quality. They have, a few years ago, the Academy proposed the idea of having a Best Popular Film Award. And then everyone laughed at this idea so much that they just basically retreated and never did it. But I think that shows you how the Academy wants to stay relevant in terms of popular culture, but it also has this fundamental mission to reward the best films. And that often doesn't mean what the biggest hits were.
In the book you have mentioned that an X-rated film called Midnight Cowboys bagged the Best Picture in the year 1917. I'm very curious to know, how was that Hollywood like? It must be very different from today's Academy.
Yeah, I mean, what interested me about that year was, okay, in 1969, Oliver won Best Picture. That was the first and only ever G-rated movie to win Best Picture. A year later, Midnight Cowboy wins, and it's the only X-rated movie to win Best Picture. So you went from G to X in a year. And what happened in that year? I mean, this was a really interesting time for film history because the old world of the studio system, like, the MGM and Paramounts and all these old studios that had been around for basically half a century already. It was kind of crumbling, this whole system, and something new was emerging, which was very different, called the New Hollywood, which was much more risque and edgy and gritty, and it gave rise to all these great movies in the 70s, like uh, Taxi Driver and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Dog Day Afternoon. So the taste in movies was changing very quickly. This new audience was emerging of young people who who had just a very different taste in films, and it made all the old stuff suddenly seem very, very old fashioned. And so the Academy had to keep up with that somehow, in a way not unlike right now, where the Academy doesn't want to be behind the times to the point where it looks antiquated. So that transition from the old Hollywood to the new Hollywood in the late 60s, early 70s is a really fascinating time.
Do you think now the change is also happening? Because I have many questions about the book, but this year's 95th Academy Awards were very special for India. We won two Oscars, that too in different categories and for two different films. This has never happened in the past. Do you think in future we'll see more of such decision by Academy, which will also help Academy achieving their objective of becoming this global body which honors cinema?
I think the Academy has gotten much more international in the past several years. The Academy started in the 20s as a just a very clubby organization for the studios in Hollywood, and over the years it's gotten a bit bigger and broader. But after Oscars So White in 2016, the Academy went out and really made efforts to bring in a lot more people and expand who the voting body was. And that meant more people of color, younger people, more women, and also, crucially, more people from around the world. And so you now have an Academy that is about 10,000 people, and it's people all over the world. And that's been a real conscious effort. And so you start to see, a movie like Parasite win Best Picture. It's not just in the international feature category, it wins Best Picture. And then this year, even something like All Quiet on the Western Front, which is a German language movie, it didn't just, win Best International Feature. It was nominated for 9 Oscars and including Best Picture. And I think with RRR, that movie became such a phenomenon. And part of it was that, like All Quiet on the Western Front, it was on Netflix. And so it could really catch on and find an audience. And it wasn't just, a foreign movie that Americans might go see at an art house theater. It was right in your living room and very accessible. And so I think that's great. And there's more chances for movies from different parts of the world to catch on with the Academy.
You mentioned. So, do you think now the Hollywood filmmakers have an added interest in stories and movies from India because they are accessible to them via Netflix?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously not everything is on Netflix, and maybe people can discover things in different ways, but I think streaming has
Via
really
streaming,
helped.
yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all sorts of streaming, it used to be that if you were an American who was interested in Indian cinema, you'd have to go seek it out somewhere. And it's very different than flipping on Netflix and you hear this movie is great and you can just watch it that easily. And I think that, combined with the growing membership in the Academy across the world, means that we might see all sorts of different movies from around the world break through and not just be, relegated to the foreign film category. They can really compete.
We of course talking about your book Oscar Wars. I want to talk to you about the article that you have written called Steven Spielberg's Oscar Curse. Inside nearly 50 years of frustration at the Academy Award for the most popular director of all time. Please tell us about this Oscar curse with the spotlight on Steven Spielberg.
Right. Well, Steven Spielberg is a very big character in my book. And what I noticed writing about him is that he is incredibly successful, by far the most successful director who's ever worked in Hollywood. And you would think that would come with a truckload of Academy Awards, but he actually hasn't won that many relative to the success he's had. And he's been nominated now 22 times, I think. He's only won the Best Director prize once, and he's only directed one winner of Best Picture, which was Schindler's List. Then he's lost so much, and it really took him until 1994 to win. You know, he started his career really, and he burst onto the scene in 1975 with Jaws, which is a gigantic success. It was nominated for Best Picture, but Spielberg was very conspicuously passed over for Best Director that year. And then all of his huge hits of the 80s, like E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and The Color Purple, they were not awarded, and he just kept losing. And it really, Schindler's List was the only time he's won both Best Director and Best Picture. A few years later, he won Best Director again for Shakespeare in Love. I'm sorry, for Saving Private Ryan, but it famously lost Best Picture to Shakespeare in Love, which was a very controversial loss. And then, since then, he's directed really serious movies and just hasn't been able to win. And I wrote that article about the Spielberg curse a few months ago, and I think you saw it again this year. I mean, The Fabelmans is a very serious personal movie, and it didn't win any Oscars.
We were hoping Academy will give him, because we saw it was Golden Globe that honored him. So but talking about Saving Private Ryan, you of course have explained in the book in detail about the Best Picture race between Saving Private Ryan and Shakespeare in Love in the year 1999. It bagged 7 Oscars, including Best Picture. It is widely called the most notorious campaign for Oscars. Shakespeare in Love was, of course, produced by Harvey Weinstein. Would you please like to talk to us about that chapter?
Yes. So this was an extremely ugly fight for Best Picture in 1999. And I knew that part of the book would have to break it down, essentially, what happened. And part of what happened was that Harvey Weinstein, who at the time ran Miramax with his brother Bob, was notorious for running very, very aggressive Oscar campaigns. Part of his business model was that he would try to win as many Oscars, pour money into his campaigns. And he would do things like have his staff call Academy members at home multiple times. And meanwhile, Saving Private Ryan came from DreamWorks, which was Spielberg's brand new studio. And it was their first big hit after a couple of years of struggling. And they basically felt like they had this Oscar in the bag, like it was the front runner. And it was the front runner for about 6 months until Shakespeare in Love came along. And then from that moment on, these two studios were just battling head to head. And the thing that made it really ugly is that DreamWorks heard through the grapevine that Weinstein was negative campaigning against Saving Private Ryan, basically saying that the first 25 minutes were great, but then it becomes a standard World War II movie and kind of run of the mill. And so that is what really made it incredibly contentious and ugly. And when Shakespeare in Love won Best Picture, it just hit all of Hollywood like a frying pan to the face. Everyone thought that Harvey Weinstein had stolen this Oscar from Steven Spielberg. And what was interesting was that all the studios were so angry at what Weinstein had supposedly done, but then they copied it. They copied what was called as the Weinstein playbook, because they realized if he's doing this kind of campaigning, we need to do it. We're not going to let him steal all our Oscars. And that's how you got this very bloated, expensive, drawn out thing called Oscar season with consultants and strategists and budgets and all that.
In 5 years from now, Academy will be celebrating its 100-year anniversary. Do you think there will be more categories that will be added to the existing one to celebrate its 100-year celebration? Maybe like best stunt director. Do you think so?
One thing that I learned looking at all 9.5 decades of Academy history is that the categories have always been in flux. They were very different. The very first Academy Awards in 1929 had 2 different top prizes, one called Outstanding Picture and one called Best Unique or Artistic Picture. So it was kind of like a best, popular film and best art film. And then the next year they changed it. And then some years they would have, best black and white cinematography and best color, or they'd have, best original score and best adapted score. So the categories have changed. Just recently they combined sound mixing and sound editing into just one thing called best sound. So I think the categories, we should never assume that they're going to stay the way they are. I've heard a lot of people advocate for a best stunts category. That would be interesting. So I don't know.
Michael, why Oscars have become so predictable? When do you think Oscar will become full of surprises? Right now, by these precursor events like Golden Globe and Critics' Choice Award, give you a fair idea about who will be the big winners.
See, I think there are always surprises. This year was actually not so surprising because it's very unusual that one movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, was such a clear front runner, and it wound up winning pretty much everything. But I was there just a few years ago when everyone thought Glenn Close was going to win Best Actress finally, and then surprise, it was Olivia Colman. I was there the year of the envelope mix up where everyone thought it was going to be La La Land, and then it was, but then it wasn't, and it was Moonlight. So I do think there's still plenty of room for surprises.
I was rooting for La La Land though, but uh, when do you think movements like Oscar so white will become a thing of the past? Because even this year, Oscars were criticized with the hashtag Oscars so male. It was observed by many that Oscars failed to recognize the work of women directors.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a real transformation in the past 7 or 8 years of the diversity of the Academy members, but that still doesn't mean that the winners are, you know, reflective of the world population. But I think that these things happen in fits and starts. Progress is not a straight line. The last 2 years, the best director winner was a woman, and then this year you had no women nominees at all in that category. This was a terrific year for Asian representation, especially with all of the winners from Everything Everywhere All at Once, and Michelle Yeoh became the first Asian winner of Best Actress. But there was a lot of controversy over the lack of Black actresses in Best Actress, because Viola Davis wasn't nominated, Danielle Deadwyler from Till wasn't nominated. So I don't know. I think as long as there are still these firsts, then we're still going to be talking about what hasn't happened yet. There still hasn't been a Black Best Director winner. Michelle Yeoh was the first woman of color to win since Halle Berry 21 years ago. So I think we're still getting there. We still haven't seen a woman win Best Cinematography, for instance. Yeah. So as long as we're still counting on one finger, on one hand, I mean, we're still going to be reflecting on how imbalanced it's been.
While reading the book, you also discover about these movie muggles like Louis B. Mayer and his advances towards this young actress. Would you please like to talk to us about such incidents of casting cows? Because the book, of course, have made us look at them from a different light now.
Right. I mean, this was a huge topic a few years ago with Harvey Weinstein, and we talked about Me Too and how sexual assault and sexual harassment have been so pervasive in the movie industry. But that is a very old story. And if you look back to the early moguls like Louis B. Mayer, Harry Cohn at Columbia, there were lots of abuses that just got swept under the rug. And Louis B. Mayer is an important character in my book because he came up with the idea of the Academy when he was in charge of MGM. But I didn't want to ignore the side of his personality where he there was an actress named Anita Page, and he basically propositioned her for like a sexual relationship and said, well, I can make you in 3 pictures or I can ruin you in 3 pictures. And she said no. And she, a few years later, she was completely out of the business. So I don't know. I wanted to make sure that kind of history was reflected as well.
And do you have a favorite chapter in the book?
A favorite chapter. I have it's hard to choose, but I did love writing about the ceremony in 1989, which was notoriously known as the worst Oscars ever. It had this crazy 11-minute opening number starring Rob Lowe, and he sang Proud Mary with a woman dressed as Snow White. It was this kind of legendary fiasco.
You always
And I,
mentioned about it. I saw that video.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
insane. It's completely insane. And I wanted to sort of deconstruct why it happened, who was behind it. It was really the work of this producer named Alan Carr, who was a larger than life figure who wore all, incredible caftans. And he had produced the movie Grease. And he was just a totally flamboyant gay man, loved the Academy Awards, but when he finally got the chance to produce them, it ruined his life. And I think this chapter was so fun to work on because every detail in it is just so glitzy 80s over the top. And yet there's a kind of tragedy at the heart of it, which is this man who wanted something so much. And when he finally got it, it destroyed him. I'm always interested in how total artistic disasters take place, movies that are so bad you think, how did anyone make this? And this was sort of like that kind of story. How did everyone miss the fact that this was going to be such a huge bomb?
Michael Schulman, many thanks for talking to me. Oscar was a history of Hollywood in gold, sweat, and tears is available on Amazon. It's one for the keeps. Now looking forward to your next book. Thank you so much and best of luck.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Thank you.